watching New Voice for New Jersey, Race for U.S. Senate.
And welcome back, everyone, to this PIX-11 News political special, New Voice for New Jersey, Race for U.S. Senate. And before the break, we introduced you to Republican Curtis Bashaw. And now it is time to meet Democrat Andy Kim. Now, Kim was raised in South Jersey. He studied political science at the University of Chicago before attending Oxford. During the Obama administration, he served as a civilian advisor for the U.S. State Department in Afghanistan. And he also represented New Jersey's 3rd congressional district since 2019, which also includes towns in Burlington, Mercer, and Monmouth counties. But Kim came up to Hudson County to meet with me at the Coach House Diner in North Bergen. Okay, Congressman Kim, thank you for being here today. I want to ask you first, we're sitting in this diner. What's your go-to diner order?
My go-to diner order, probably, I'd say I'm a big fan of just like a Caesar salad and like a crock of French onion soup or something like that, or like just like a turkey club.
I like
that's
that.
That's usually my those are my go-to.
I like that. You know, and since we are sitting in a diner, I want to talk first and foremost about like a menu just like this one, right? Because prices have seemingly gone up for so many things, and it's so tough for families just to sit down and order a meal out and be able to afford it, right? Inflation, such an issue. So if you were to win the Senate seat, how do you bring immediate relief to so many families?
Yeah, look, I hear it from everybody, just, the challenges that they're facing, and not just about food. It's about, gas in the car. It's about housing. That's probably the biggest thing that I'm hearing. And, the families I talk to, they talk about it like it feels like death from 1,000 cuts, like just like public transit and this and that. And so, look, what we're trying to do is find ways to be able to, lower out-of-pocket costs for people, like for instance, like what I've been trying to do in healthcare, prescription drug costs, the work that I did, legislation I authored that would cap out-of-pocket costs for seniors when it comes to their prescription drugs, things like that we're trying to do. And then when it comes to food in particular, a lot of what we suffered from in terms of COVID was also about supply chain issues and problems there. When we see, how expensive it is to transport food around and to get here. So, that's something that, I've been really laser focused on as well, to try to figure out how we can make sure we're more resilient and we're, using more products from our local communities to be able to, get into supermarkets and restaurants.
And going with the diner theme right here, a lot of issues has come up now about tipping, right? So what are you tipping on a bill? And should those tips be taxed?
Yeah, look, I tip usually around 18 to 20% on usually a little higher, like if I'm with my kids and they make a bit of a mess. Yes. So, the drill. Yep. So like, look, I think we want to make sure that we have as much resource coming into, communities. As for like the tax side of things, I still have to get a sense of just like what would that cost our country, So I think in general we want to make sure that we all need to have comprehensive tax reform as a country. I think everyone agrees to that. My main priority right now is about getting rid of this SALT tax cap that we've seen just hurting a lot of families, and that's something that I want to make sure we're prioritizing. So that's my main goal, is to make sure that that goes away and doesn't come back. On top of that, we need to think through like what are the other pieces that.
So no answer if you would support tips being taxed.
It's not something that I know enough about just yet. Yeah.
You mentioned some of the prices going up, and I wanted to play a question for you right here from one of our reporters who was outside of a grocery store. Obviously, groceries are such an issue for families as well.
I'm here near a ShopRite in Toms River. It's no secret that New Jerseyans have a higher cost of living than most Americans, and that includes rising prices at the grocery store. Vice President Harris has pledged to go after what she calls grocery price gouging, but Democrats might not have enough votes to get it done. So how, if at all, will you compromise with Republicans on an initiative that your presidential candidate has flagged as important to her?
Yeah, look, I think what we saw during the pandemic was we did see a lot of companies, not all of them, but we did see some companies really trying to jack up the prices of produce and products, whether it was chicken or other things like that. And that did hurt a lot of consumers, a lot of families. So, those are the things that, I hope to kind of focus in on and make sure we're addressing. We have some legislation already in the works to try to address this and make sure it's just about making sure that we have the kind of competitive markets that customers will benefit from. Like I think some of the challenges that we see are some of these large monopolies, big corporations that are able to just kind of run the tables on this. So I think a healthy capitalism is about having healthy competition, and that's something that I hope in a bipartisan way we can address. As someone who worked on the Small Business Committee in Congress for a number of years, it's always about making sure that we have more business as well from small businesses, not just the big corporations that are running the tables.
You mentioned salt tax. Let's go there for a second, because Senator Chuck Schumer vowed not to extend the salt cap. It is such an issue for New Jersey voters. So are you in favor of eliminating the salt caps? And if you are, how do you make up for some of the lost revenue that has been kind of built into some of these budgets?
Yeah, look, I mean, we absolutely should get rid of it. I mean, worst comes to worst, it expires and we prevent it from coming back in. And I think that's a really important distinction. And I think why we want to make sure New Jersey voters understand and are reminded about why this happened to start with, which is Donald Trump. Donald Trump is the reason we have this salt tax deduction cap, and I just, we know that those are the types of things he's going to try to push on again if he's back into the Oval Office. So the first thing we need to do is make sure that we don't have Donald Trump back in the Oval Office, because he's the one that hurt us. We knew it was a political decision. He was coming after our state. On top of that, we want to make sure that we have, the type of tax reform that it's going to focus in on helping support middle-class families. And that's been a big misconception, thinking that the salt cap is just about, wealthy people. In New Jersey, it's about, a lot of people in communities that are trying to make sure that they're paying for education and other costs. Yeah. So that's what we're trying to protect.
Donald Trump hasn't been president for the past 4 years, right? And it seems to be the issue of you want to eliminate it is one thing, but getting it to the finish line is another, right? And Democrats were not able to get it across the finish line over the past 4 years either to eliminate it. So how can you ensure a voter that if you were a member of the Senate, you could convince both parties to get it done?
Yeah, look, I mean, I wish we were able to get it done. I think what we kept seeing was this, the filibuster continuing to be a problem of getting really anything done in the Senate, and that's just become a huge problem, which is why I'm in favor of filibuster reform for us to be able to get the kind of relief for middle-class families when it comes to the salt tax or anything else. But that's also, it's also why we don't have the gun violence prevention advancements that we need. It's also why, we haven't been able to codify women's reproductive rights, is that, we continue to have, Speaker Johnson right now in the House of Representatives refusing to allow for a clean vote on a bill to get rid of the salt tax cap. Like he's blocking it. He's not holding true to his promise to even colleagues in his own caucus, Republicans that are trying to push this. And that's I hope people see that it's Speaker Johnson, doing this, blocking the ability for us to be able to have these reforms.
You mentioned filibuster reform. Does that mean you're in favor of getting rid of the filibuster?
I'm in favor of returning. I mean, the best proposal that I've heard so far is about returning it to this idea of like the talking filibuster, right? So people can talk as long as they want. And they can have their voice heard, and it's about making sure that people are able to be able to articulate what their concerns are, but not hold up the entirety of the legislative agenda of America. I just don't think that any single person should have that ability to just kind of hold our legislative agenda hostage in this country. And we've seen how it's been weaponized over the course of the last few years, last few decades. It's getting worse and worse, and I think it's really showing the degradation of our ability to do anything. Now we're basically at a place where the only time you can get something done is through budget reconciliation process.
Yeah, but isn't allowing somebody to talk and talk and talk filibuster?
Yeah, that's why I think the talking filibuster, I think that's a reform that we can do.
Okay.
But that's not what we have right now, which is where an individual person, without even talking, can hold up the entirety of that process.
Yes. I want to talk about the Vice President Kamala Harris for a second. She just became the Democratic nominee. You were there at the convention. You had a prominent speaking role as well. She's really taken more of a moderate stance since becoming Vice President. For example, she once favored a ban on fracking. She once was a fan of Medicare for all, and she was once a fan of shifting resources from police. She kind of walked those back a bit and moved more to the center. Do you think that has compromised her at all, of moving too much to the middle?
That it's compromised her? I don't know. I mean, look, what she's trying to do, like when you're trying to run for president of the United States, it's about building a wide coalition. It's about listening, and things have changed tremendously over just the last few years, especially because of the pandemic and other problems. So, I want somebody that's going to be able to think things through and try to assess things. And, I don't want an ideologue. I want someone that's going to be pragmatic and practical about the challenges that we're facing. That's going to shape, the different priorities that they're going to focus in on. So, I feel good about, the ability to have someone like Kamala Harris be thoughtful, be engaged on this, and really try to figure out how to solve problems. I always say, like with my job is not to impose my my priorities and agenda upon my district. I do a lot of town halls. I've now done like 78 town halls to listen to people and be responsive to them. We're supposed to be their voice, the voice of the constituents.
So what do you, I guess, attribute the change of position to?
Well, I think, listening to, hearing different issues that are facing it, I think, having been the vice president for nearly 4 years now, going all over the country and engaging with people beyond what she had before as someone who was senator of one state and then running in a primary, for that race. It's different when you've been the sitting vice president. You're taking in the issues. And like I said, look at where we're at as a country now compared to 4 years ago. Things are different, and we want to make sure that we have leaders that can stay apprised of that and taking in that. So I think that shows a good sense of leadership.
On the flip side, the nominee on the Republican side, of course, is Donald Trump, and you've painted Donald Trump as an existential threat. President Biden has repeatedly called him a threat to democracy, right? So if Mr. Trump were to win the election, should he be sworn in as president?
Well, look, I'm going to certainly do everything I can to prevent him from becoming the next president because, I spent 2 years in Congress with him in the Oval Office. I've seen the damage that he's done. And it's not just about what's happening here in the country, but just internationally, too. I can't tell you how many leaders in other countries have called me and really asked me, like he's not really going to win, is he? They're terrified about, what this means for American foreign policy as well. Look, so I think we got to win at the ballot box, and that's what's going to be. I'm definitely an institutionalist in terms of I support the Constitution of the United States. That's my sworn oath. So I'm going to make sure that that's followed through.
Meaning if he wins, he should be sworn in.
Yeah, look, whatever the outcome is of the election, we will, as a country, move forward and support that candidate who won and come into office. And that's different than what he did and what we saw on January 6th, being there at the Capitol that day, I'll never forget it. So, yes, I hope that everybody commits to the Constitution and that we recognize that we are a country of rule of law, and that should go no matter what.
I want to talk about a big issue for New Jersey right now, and that is transit and the commute. And boy, oh boy, what a summer it's been. So 15% fare hike, and there's 3% fare hikes in the future. With that came a summer of hell, as how many riders described it to me, right? Delay after delay after delay. So does the federal government have to step in now and take a look at what's happening with NJ Transit? And would you support legislation maybe reimbursing some of these riders if they're delayed for such an amount of time, much like the airline industry does?
Yeah, I think that there definitely should be some greater consumer rights actions that are here. I ride NJ Transit. My wife uses it to get to work every day she goes to work. I remember there was a time when I was in New York City coming back into Jersey, trying to get home to be able to get my kids tucked into bed. And as soon as I got to Penn Station, everything was wiped out. So it's terrible. People in New Jersey, they deserve reliability. Yeah. Especially given the challenges. And look, I'm from South Jersey, where we have a public transit desert down there. So, we don't even have the options of riding trains up to New York. So, big problems that we have that I hope I can be part of the solution on. That's why, I voted on and supported the bipartisan infrastructure law, to pump, millions of dollars back into our infrastructure, billions of dollars actually back to New Jersey. And those are the types of things that I think we need to be able to modernize this. So, yes, we need that strategy going forward, but we also need short-term solutions. There needs to be something. We can't just tell people, oh, look, we passed the money, 5-10 years down the road, it'll get better. There needs to be relief right now. And, that's where I do think the federal government needs to engage. because it's not just about NJ Transit. It's also about Amtrak. It's also about making sure that we have that system moving forward in a way that's going to help riders.
Another big issue, and your opponent calls this what he describes as the #1 issue Democrats are going to want you to focus in on, but he says it's not the #1 issue, and that's reproductive rights. So let's talk about it, because if Democrats do win, right, and move to codify Roe v. Wade once again, how are you voting?
Well, look, I voted already to be able to codify women's reproductive rights. And, it's no wonder that, my opponent, Mr. Bashaw, doesn't want to talk about this, because he went on an interview and he called this a social issue. And I heard what J.D. Vance said, like that, this is not a normal issue that women care about. Like, it's absolutely wrong. And it's not just about women, it's about all of us, that we don't want to see freedom taken away from people, the ability for us to be able to make decisions about our own bodies. And, for Mr. Bashaw, someone who supports the Dobbs decision, supports the Supreme Court's decision to take that freedom away from individuals, give it to state legislatures, I find that to be just so horrific, really, honestly. And I think that shows how dangerous he can be, Mr. Bashaw being in the Senate, refusing to support women's reproductive rights, and also supporting, potentially Supreme Court nominees from a second term, President Trump. I think that really shows where he stands.
On the flip side, say Republicans do maintain control, right, and they want to discuss national limits and bans. How do you vote? And what I mean by that is, do you support any restrictions whatsoever when it comes to reproductive rights?
Well, what we've seen by how the Republicans have operated so far is we see that, there's such an extreme measure there that, any tool that they have to be able to restrict things, it's just gone overboard. Like, even if it's about, setting on the number of weeks or whatnot, we've seen how in those states, it's basically still created a culture which no one feels comfortable operating within. So it's basically created, just complete removal of any type of health care, reproductive health care in those states. So, that's why, I just think that right now, we're moving forward with the Women's Health Protection Act, something that codifies Roe, what we had before. I think that makes a lot of sense.
So you don't support restrictions or bans?
No, I don't, because we've seen how they've been weaponized, by states all across this country.
I want to talk about gun violence. Just a few hundred miles from where we're sitting, former President Trump was shot. There's been mass shooting after mass shooting, right? But when you zero in on the former president being shot, his party doesn't bring up gun reform after that. And so I guess the question is, if that can't galvanize the other side, how do you bridge the gap between the two parties to get effective gun reform and change?
Yeah, I remember when I was younger, when the massacre happened at Sandy Hook, with the first graders. I mean, it was just like, when I saw that, like, things didn't happen and fix after that, like, I lost hope, honestly. Like, I was just like, if that's not going to galvanize this country, what will? It was really the Parkland students that just reignited in me this possibility that we can do something about this. I mean, look, we came together after the Uvalde shooting, which is another horrific massacre, to pass, the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, the largest piece of gun violence prevention legislation in decades. Did it solve everything? Of course not. But did it move the needle forward? Yes. And, I think more investment on mental health, I'm happy to engage on that, but the Republicans have to recognize that is not the totality of the problem. We continue to see the access challenges that are out there in terms of the firearms, the lethality that's there. And I think, red flag laws is a place where I'm having conversations with Republicans in Congress that seem open to moving on this. And I'm hopeful that those are potential places where we can make more progress in a bipartisan way.
Something your opponent does say is one of the #1 issues is immigration. So I want to talk about the migrant crisis right now. And when you look at it, do you think that there was and still is a crisis at the border?
Yeah. No, look, I mean, I say that as someone who's worked in national security before. I spent my career doing counterterrorism work, wanted to make sure we're keeping our country safe. I do think that we need to have control over our own borders, whether they are land, air or sea. We want to make sure we're addressing this. But, what you see is not just a crisis, but you see a completely broken immigration system that's been broken because of decades of neglect by politicians refusing to try to take real steps and fix this. I mean, it's mind-boggling to me that just like 11 years ago, we had, 69 senators vote yes on a comprehensive immigration reform bill. Like, did everyone get what they wanted? No, but that's what it means to be an adult.
So what's the solution now?
Well, look, I mean, I think, bringing back up, what was starting off with what was there 11 years ago, before things got even worse. Right now, a lot of my colleagues that yell the loudest about immigration, they don't actually want to solve this. I've talked to them, like, they just think it's a good political talking point, riles people up. But like tactical, tangible things, like I've been pushing for, increase in, for instance, increase in federal immigration judges. We have about 680 some immigration judges. We have 3 million pending immigration cases. There's no way that they can address all of those needs. It would take 10 years for them to just get through the backlog now. It makes total sense that we would invest in more immigration judges, more judicial resources, because that backlog is part of what's causing so much of the problem. Those are practical things that, shows we can take care of our own borders while still staying true to a country that, that wants to make sure that immigration is part of our heritage. As a son of immigrants, married to an immigrant, we can all agree that we want to make sure that continues.
I want to talk about the Israel-Hamas war for a second, and because you've called for a ceasefire, but it came on April 2nd.
It was earlier than that. The first time was in November of last year, and then also in January and elsewhere I talked about.
But you did also vote in favor of sending aid, right? And some would correlate sending the aid with people dying. So can you explain the position to those folks who might think that? Yeah,
look, I mean, I told you, I worked in national security in the Middle East, Iraq and Afghanistan. The country in the middle there, which is Iran, has been a real problem. This is something that I've seen firsthand over the course of my career. We see the dangers that they pose, and especially, what we saw earlier this year was a direct attack from Iran to Israel. That's something that's real, and that's something that we want to make sure that Israel and other allies and partners in the region can defend themselves from that type of danger. So yes, I support Iron Dome. I lead the charge on getting the appropriation funding for Iron Dome every single year. I think that there is space for us to say that Israel absolutely has a right to exist, that it has a right to defend itself, while also saying we want to make sure that the Palestinian people have their right to be able to have self-determination, to be able to have the two-state solution that is needed for a long-term peace. That is not mutually exclusive. The problem is so much of our politics reduces everything down to something that's binary. And I think that that's what's causing so much of the challenge right now, is that it just seems like that is completely separate. And that's someone who's worked in diplomacy, I've been at negotiating tables before for deals. You have to be able to make sure you can finally get that across the line.
And I want to end this conversation on why we're even here in the first place, right? And that's because of what happened to Bob Menendez. And you're going to potentially fill this seat that was long held by somebody who represented the Latino community. A Latino community who often feels ignored and that they don't have enough representation, right? So how are you going to make sure that you have their backs?
Yeah, look, what I will say is, the same thing that I've done in my congressional district. I've done these town halls. Every town hall, I say the same thing. I say, whether you voted for me or not, you're my boss. My job is to serve you and your family to the best of my ability. I hope people, even if they disagree with some of my policies, I hope they see me as someone who's committed to public service, which honestly, we don't see as much of as we need to in our politics these days. I'm a son of immigrants. As I said, I'm married to an immigrant. I'm somebody that, doesn't come from a well-off, well-connected family. I think that can connect with, a lot of people in New Jersey, whether in the Latino community, the Black community, the broader white community, or others, the Asian American community that's never had a voice in the U.S. Senate from the entire East Coast of America. I want to show people I can represent and be a voice for people even if I don't look like them. I won a congressional district that's 85% white, less than 3% Asian, that voted for Trump twice. And I've been able to now 3 times elected to Congress from that district. So, I just think it's important for us to try to understand what leadership means in that way.
Okay, are you ready for rapid fire?
Sure.
All right, is there a Central Jersey?
Yes.
There is a Central Jersey. I'm not going to ask you where it begins. Is it pork roll or Taylor ham?
Look, I grew up calling it pork roll.
I'm Taylor ham. Okay. It's in North Jersey. I think South Jersey thing. Springsteen or Bon Jovi?
I hate having to choose, but Springsteen was where I kind of grew up.
The Jets, Giants, or Eagles?
I'm an Eagles fan.
Okay. Ooh, favorite boardwalk food?
My favorite boardwalk food would probably be a funnel cake, as long as the seagulls don't take it.
There you go. And what would you say is the best shore town?
The best shore town? Oh man, you're creating all sorts of divisions in my house. I take my kids to Brigantine, nice shallow beach where my 7-year-old and my 8-year-old can walk out, and I don't get worried that there's going to be big waves.
All right, Congressman Andy Kim, thank you for doing this.
Thanks so much for having me.